have an apple tree, and they don't need to be waiting for the charity of others. The highest form of charity is to eliminate the need for charity.
Right. So again, in kind of conclusion on this part, we would say that private property, materiality, and particularly now that technology is advancing so much, need not be considered unspiritual or unreligious or unchristian, but that actually, through embracing these Christian principles of a notion of abundance that exceeds human efforts is something that can help us straighten out our science so that we have a solid foundation. We're building our economy on something solid.
But Jesus did not shy away from eating with the rich and having nice dinners, and he didn't fast. He was very, very, very specific on that, and he said that God wants us to have abundance. It's our problem. I think God cries when he sees the unnecessary suffering on earth. Certainly, Jesus cried when he saw the children of Israel, and he said, "How often I'd like to gather you up like a mother hen gathers up his chicks." So I think we can do much better, but again, it depends upon an institutional understanding and a proper foundation. And like you say, by including people in private property, then everybody can have the abundance that right now is enjoyed only by the few. But that doesn't mean that we may not have spiritual growth. It may be that if binary economics is implemented on Earth and people have many, many more material things, it may be all the harder for them to get into the kingdom of heaven because they're going to be all diverted by all these trinkets and things like that. Materialism can be a temptation. One of the things I say about material goods is they either elevate your spirit or they bring you down. One or the other. There's not much of a neutral.
But Robert, I think it's sort of arrogant for us to make the determination for another whether it'll bring them down or not. I think what I get out of my studies with you is that allow this abundance to come forth for all, and it will take care of itself. People will determine not to gluttonize themselves or whatever.
That's exactly right. I simply say we need to recognize that with these spiritual blessings and with abundance, it may actually test us in different ways.
Yeah.
It's just, this is not quite on the subject, but there's increasing talk about kind of scientific fixes that will allow us to live forever. Now that will really test the faith. Would you rather live forever, or would you rather end your life naturally so you can go to heaven, hopefully? So, that with the abundance of technology, we are actually tested in new ways. And you're right; it's an individual test. It's not something that that people should decide for us.
Well, I think we've brought up so many tremendous topics. I think, like you said many times here, to have the foundation be rock solid is better than to be having it on a sandy, shifting beach. And then, then we can decide about immortality and longevity and what technology is, and even this human machine paradigm, because I think, again, when you go into private property carefully, to me, the idea of consciousness being everywhere means we don't have to be afraid or fearful about the intelligence of the computers. Once we're solid about understanding our own divinity, then we can allow it for everything else around us.
I think that's right. It occurred to me that maybe the one other point that we didn't make that we were thinking about making in the advances is the harmony of this kind of thinking with the principles of science, and I think that's probably the only other thing that we didn't really cover.
Yeah.
Let me talk about it in this way. The purpose of a new paradigm, and I think seeing the vase between the two faces, or seeing that the Earth spins and goes around the sun rather than vice versa. These are new new paradigms, new fundamental ways of looking at things. The purpose of a new paradigm is to explain, to dispel an illusion, or to explain an important anomaly, to explain something that you can't explain with the old paradigm. And the simplest example is that every morning we see the sunrise and every evening we see the sunset. It's cross-cultural, everybody sees it, but it's a complete illusion. The sun doesn't rise, the sun doesn't set. It's an illusion built on a false premise. And there was an anomaly. The anomaly was that these planets that they were observing, like Jupiter and Saturn, would be going in a certain direction, and then suddenly they seemed to go backwards. And what was happening is that the Earth was also going around the sun, and it's like two freight trains or two trains. When one's going faster than the other, you get the feeling that although both are going forward, one looks like it's going backwards. That was an anomaly. It wasn't a huge anomaly. You could still navigate on the Earth, assuming that the sun went around the Earth, but it was an anomaly. Now, with economics, we have two issues. We have, first of all, the illusion. What's the illusion? The illusion is that capital is making labor more productive. That's a huge illusion, and it's also very unchristian if you think that the purpose of us is to understand our place in relationship to God, and it's the non-human factors that is really producing the abundance. But the anomaly, in economics, and I call it anomaly, is we have huge unused capacity that we do not use. Now I say that, and some people say that. Not everybody thinks that. In fact, modern economic theory obscures, doesn't even talk about unused capacity. Right-wing economic theory tends to assume that we're pretty well near at full capacity. If there was a way of helping the poor without taking from the rich, someone would have done it already. If there was a $20 bill on the ground, somebody would have already picked it up. And there's this assumption that we're near perfect, when, of course, Christians know that anything human cannot be near perfect. We all fall far short of the glory of God. So the idea that we have perfectly competitive markets is purely homocentric. But that's the assumption. But I believe, and some people believe, and even left-wingers and some right-wingers believe, that we actually have a lot of unused capacity. If we wanted to feed and clothe and shelter the world today, and we had somebody who could do that, we could do it a heck of a lot more fully than we could have 100 or 200 years ago. We have unused capacity. Why? Why do we have unused capacity when people are hungry? Why doesn't supply create its own demand? Why is it that we have vast abundance next to poverty? Is it only because people are stingy and want things for themselves, or is there an institutional problem? So there's this anomaly. It's an anomaly. It's a confusion. It certainly seems to defy Christianity.
The science.
Up again, this anomaly that we have unused capacity, you can try to explain it in terms of, well, people are greedy and they're not enlightened and they're not spiritual. That's fine to look at an individual level, but the institutional level, what is it in the system that may be not working? And so, now building on this point, I want to say, first of all, that although today neither the left wing nor the right wing nor the center talks much about unused capacity. We talk about all these current problems we have, subprime lending, but we don't talk about unused capacity. We don't talk about the fact that we could build a lot more houses for a lot more people if only people had the money. All right. That's not even talked about. The last time unused capacity existed in such a way that politically you couldn't deny it was during the Great Depression. And that was a time when we had passenger trains going through the country without people who could afford the passenger tickets. We had freight trains going through the country without much freight because people weren't building anything and shipping anything because people weren't buying very much. But those freight trains, although they were empty of freight, were full of people looking for work. It was the essence of unused capacity.
Yeah.
But I would say we have more unused capacity today, in a way, than we do then. Now, it's interesting when you say that, it forces the people who think about economic theory to realize their definitions may be very stingy, very conceptually stingy. When an economist talks about unused capacity, the economist is talking about a kind of a dual ratio, a two-part ratio. The capital side is plant and equipment that exists but is not being used, so that's the numerator. And it's divided by the total of plant and equipment. So typically right now, today, we have about 10% of our plant and equipment that we're not using, and we're using 90%. So 10 divided by 100, but we have about 10% unused capacity. In the Depression, we had about 30, 40% unused capacity. It was a big issue. But that's a stingy notion of unused capacity. It assumes that we couldn't build more capacity. And if only people had the money to buy. And I give that example by saying, assume you're the king of the world or the queen of the world, and you wanted to feed and clothe and shelter the world. And it's asked, would it be easier or harder than 100 years ago? Well, looking at some of the basics, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, it took about 60% of the people to grow food for the rest of us. Now it takes 3%. 150 years ago, everybody was making their own clothes. Now about 2 or 3% of people can make enough clothes for everybody. 100 years ago, housing, shelter, people, 80 or 90% of people were building their own shelters. Today, you've got it's a housing industry, but you've got a relatively small number of people.
But Robert, what about
you could feed and clothe and shelter the world today easier than 100 years ago, 200 years ago.
But Robert, what about the quality of life of those 3%, making all our clothes in those slave shops and
that's a very good point. But the quality of their life would increase greatly if a major part of their earning capacity came from capital ownership. That is to say, people would work a lot less. We haven't really talked about how this would evolve over time. In fact, I almost feel like I want to say, let me finish this point, and we'll come back to the people who are doing that 3%.
Okay.
So why don't we just sort of say that's a very important point, but let's just finish this anomaly issue and then come back to that.
Thank you.
So we have, and then I change my hypothetical and I say, suppose you're still the king and the queen of the world. Instead of wanting to feed and clothe and shelter the world, you're like the pharaohs. You just the way they love pyramids, you love unused capacity. So you swing in the Flint, Michigan.
Just a second, I like pyramids.
You see a plant in mothballs, and you say, well, that's not enough. I want 5 plants in Flint, Michigan, each one state of the art, with incredible capacity, but each one, idle in mothballs with my name on it. I think you could build five plants in Flint, Michigan of huge capacity today much more easily than 50 or 100 years ago. So the point is, unused capacity has to be understood not just by existing plant and equipment. And the labor side, by the way, is the unemployment rate, assuming anybody who's not working doesn't want to work, although the truth is most people aren't working because there are no jobs. So it's not just the existing plant. We have the capacity to make more capacity. So we have this huge anomaly. And now I'm just trying to finish the scientific part of this. What is the scientific thing to do when you have an anomaly and you have left-wing theory and right-wing theory and centrist theory, and none of them solve the problem? We have more sort of so-called Adam Smith free markets than 100 years ago. We have fewer barriers to international trade, and we have the capacity to globalize. We have more deregulation. We have lots of deregulation now. We have lots of Keynesian economics now, that's where the government spends. The Republicans don't talk much about Keynesian economics, but they sure do spend money on the military. That's Keynesian economics. So we have more of all these theories, but still more unused capacity and still people hungry. What a scientist does when you have 3 theories that all assume, that all try to solve a problem and can't, what a scientist would do would be to find what they agree about and suspend that assumption. That's a very scientific thing to do. So what do they all agree about? They all agree that capital makes labor more productive, and they all agree that the distribution of capital acquisition with the earnings of capital will not soak up unused capacity and will not promote growth. So if you simply, as a scientist, suspend those assumptions, voila, you get to binary economics. And so I would say that to test the theory, looking at this way, you deal with things by saying, what's the scientific method? Does the theory rest on reasonable assumptions? Does it have internal coherence? And does it predict and describe what's happening? Describe and predict what's happening? Well, the assumption that capital does its own work is obvious, it seems to me. It does its work in so many ways. People are working less and less. The purpose of production is to do more work with capital, more capital and less labor. Internal consistency, it explains where people will get the money to buy. The conventional economics, when we squeeze labor out of production, vaguely promises more jobs in the bigger economy, but labor's claim on total production has to decrease as we make more and more things with more capital and less labor. And third, does it describe and predict? Binary economics says we will have unused capacity until we broaden ownership. And it predicts that we'll have this problem and continuing problem. I think that, again, is the scientific way. So if I think binary economics is at least as good, if not better, in terms of the scientific principles. It has a coherent way of solving a problem based on assumptions that are reasonable, internally consistent, and predictive that conventional economics, left, right, and center, does not have. End of lecture on scientific method. So we can now talk about the who are working in those sweatshops, if you want. But that would be the end of my lecture on.
Well, okay. So let's put it this way. Can we say that perhaps we've grown fearful of those people working in the sweatshops, that they're going to be all angry and up in arms and they would never want to go to a party with us? Do you think we're afraid of them?
Well, I think people are afraid of them. I think certainly the rich are afraid of them, and I think the middle class is afraid of them. I think anybody who's got more will be afraid of some of those people. You have to really, it's kind of amazing how many people are really condemned to a life of endless suffering that don't rise up. But of course, there's a good history proposition that when people rise up, they get slaughtered, and I think that has been learned. But there's certainly a great deal of, I think, I think one of the things that not all rich people do, but many rich people, I think wise rich people, don't flagrantly display their wealth. There are, of course, those that do, but my guess is they're not admired by those that don't. Yes, there's a great deal of fear in that.
So is it a change of heart, Robert, because you've shown intellectually, scientifically, that the most solid foundation for the greatest abundance overall, not just abundance for everybody, but even the wealthy now, will participate in a society that's entirely more abundant. So is it a change of heart that people have to trust, that they can invite more to their party, so to speak?
I think in part it's a change of heart, and looking at another way, I think it is in part it's a lack of compassion. That is an element to it. I spend most of my life except those times when I'm doing what I must do to earn my living, I spend most of my life trying to peddle this idea. It is. I can tell you that I would have gotten further professionally if I had chosen an idea that was not off the mainstream. You get if you champion a left-wing idea for helping the poor, you get championed by all the people on the left. If you champion a right-wing idea for helping the poor, you get championed by all the people on the right. You get funding, you get rewards, you get all those things. When you advance an idea that is neither left-wing nor right-wing, that neither depends upon the rich acquiring capital with the earnings of capital and then distributing jobs and welfare to the others, and that doesn't depend upon the government acting for the half of the poor, but really uses a different system, and doesn't depend upon a mixed center between the two, you make a sacrifice. I make that sacrifice willingly because I just can't stand the fact that people go to bed hungry and they're deprived of what they could otherwise have. But I do think that not everybody has that same feeling. Now, some of it is ignorance. I think I think there's a mindset that says that there's not an important idea out there that if I learned it would make a difference. And my guess is that if we could somehow speak to the top echelons of our society, the people who, with just a very modest sacrifice, could give binary economics a platform and ask them, do you think there's an idea out there which, if you understood it, would make a big difference, a huge difference? And then most of them would say, no, I don't think that. So they start with a prejudice, and they start with the notion that it doesn't exist. And those people that are somewhat lower on the totem pole, you might be able to say, who might think, yes, there is an idea out there, but they're also convinced that if they champion it, they won't make their ways into the parlors of the rich, and you have that problem. I think if people really were...
Excuse me, and in that case, the rich never have a chance to find out.
That's exactly right.
Wow.
And of course, again, I one of my pet peeves is that you hear it continually, and then maybe not as much as we'd like, but you see people of the elites in our society saying, "Oh, there must be a better way," and we're always looking for new ideas. Well, but the truth is, they pay people to keep someone like me away from them. That's just the reality.
Yeah.
And they may not know that they're paying people to keep people away from them, but they do. They're the gatekeepers, and there are a lot of gatekeepers, and a lot of them are well paid. So you have that problem. So I don't know.
Maybe Robert, we're on the threshold of a new breakthrough where we begin to see that we were just playing roles for a while. Some of us rich, some of us poor,
Mm-hmm.
and now we can grasp a more cosmic approach. I've got this background showing how vast the universe is. And I remember a long time ago I was in a Greek church, and I don't know Greek. And all of a sudden I understood eonos, the eons to eons.
Uh-huh.
And that when you find a cosmic principle or a natural principle, it endures, and the idea of falsity or something less than a solid rock for a foundation won't last.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe we're about ready to step up to where we can embrace something that's enduring and long lasting.
Well, I certainly...
And kind of join the universe.
It would be great. I know that I am certainly willing to try to explain this to whoever will listen, who will make a difference. I do believe that that institutions like churches, foundations that are dedicated to poor and working people, unions that are dedicated, those institutions are important. Major wealthy individuals. I think I've said to you this before. If I could, Oprah's very rich, but there are in New York City, I'm sure 200 or 300 people at least, if not more, who, without really much of a sacrifice, could establish a center for binary economics, either at Syracuse, where I teach, or some other school.
No, you were giving a figure of $5 million, right?
That's right. That's a fair amount.
And now once you have that school established, then you have this reference point, so it gives kind of encouragement to people who are making policy and so on, that there is a place they can defer to, I guess, or
well,
that would.
If there were a center for binary economics, let's say in New York City, if there were a center with, let's say, a $5 million contribution where the operations would be limited to the income, and 10 million would be better than 5, by the way. Then I suppose someone like
put in
me
your request now.
could then go anywhere in the world where there was an important conference and speak. I'd be more likely to be invited because there would be
You'd have a school behind you.
There would be a center behind you.
One
of the things that binary economics has always lacked is institutional imprimatur. So it would have that. There would be students who would then begin thinking this is something worth learning. I have a seminar that I'm offering at Syracuse. It's the first time they let me offer it in many, many years. Has 8 students in it. They all like the idea. And not a single one of them is skeptical about this idea. They all see it as something that they should have been taught many years before.
No, I think it's excellent what you're saying, because I think in so many ways you can create a university of the airwaves with the internet, but I think you also need to have that physicalizing. That's what I call it.
That's right. And
you know,
I can tell you that right now, Syracuse and other schools are receiving foundational grants to get people excited about learning. I can get people excited about learning. They can't get people excited about learning because they're not teaching something that will make a difference.
Yes, I so much agree with
And
you.
I can demonstrate that with a foundation in a school, if I were allowed. The reason there aren't 50 centers for binary economics around the country is because there's not one.
Yeah.
I'm convinced of that.
So you have to sort of break that.
That's right.
And you know what's really astonishing is, just lately I know some people, some of the most inspiring people to my work, and they're homeless. And they're doing, amazing art on this 9/11 TV fakery. And there's this building, 12 Warren Street. They because they're artists, they give the official Warren 12 report. And this is sort of a derelict-looking building. And every 6 months it flips for millions of dollars more. You know what I mean? They don't even bother to fix it up.
Mm-hmm.
It keeps flipping. So if one building in New York can flip for practically the price of, or the cost of what you're saying, could establish an entire school that then would give, substance behind you, and you'd say, like you say, there could be 50 schools because there's one. I think it's just a matter of introducing the concept to people to see why are we like fish that are thirsty,
Well, it is a mystery. And I think there are those that understand the idea and prefer it not to be known.
No, but you see, this is where I get back again to the change of heart and the masters that we need to help us with that change of heart, because I really think, and I do a lot of study of conspiracy, but my most present conclusion right now is deeper than conspiracy is ignorance.
I agree with that. And at least ignorance you can work with.
Yeah.
Conspiracy, you're in a fight, but ignorance you can work with.
Well,
If you want to, I don't know if you want to go back to your question about the people working in the sweatshops.
Please, thank you.
But if you put the little graph, the 6-box diagram, and the little curve that's below it back on the screen, I can say something about that.
Okay.
Right now, I'm getting your. I'm not getting anything from your.
Hit refresh.
Oh, hit refresh.
Hit refresh.
Let me see where my refresh.
I should be reminding people of refresh.
I'm still getting a fellow with a little. He's a very handsome guy, but he doesn't.
No, you have to hit refresh.
I am doing that, but it doesn't. Maybe I got to go back online. Maybe I got offline.
Yeah, I think you got offline.
Well, it says I'm online, but I'll sign off and sign back on again.
No, that's a cross I have of Jesus.
No, I'm just getting a fellow who doesn't look very much like Jesus at all. Looks like a modern character.
Really?
Yeah, I'm getting something different.
That's really strange. I wish I knew what you were getting, because...
Well, there's a fellow, and he's got his hands folded, and it says YouTube.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Do you know how to do a screenshot?
I don't know, but I'm getting on again.
Uh-huh. I wonder if you hit another tab, but that doesn't seem likely.
Well, I'll be on in a moment.
Okay. No, sometimes it gets very wacky. I can't even close down my computer to reboot it. But anyway, I'm just thinking, you say conspiracy you can't work with, but I do think you can work with it. You have to keep doing the same thing for ignorance. It's all knowledge. It's just a deeper problem than conspiracy is this need for the change of heart.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I guess that's a scientific method too. I don't think you can just say, oh, let me open my heart. Maybe that's what you're meaning by the grace.
Well, that is grace.
Yeah.
I don't, God, all things are possible. Now I'm going to go rabbit hole.
Central.tv. I've got Jesus here energizing the six. I think people are also afraid of institutions. They say, oh my God, the Federal Reserve, the banks. And then they've got these half knowledge that says get rid of the banks, get rid of the Federal Reserve, instead of what you're saying, hey, if it's good enough for the rich to acquire capital, we can keep those same institutions, and then we don't have to be afraid of the scariness of these institutions that are immovable.
The rich,
we make them move for us.
Those people that want to keep the poor poor, and I think there are at least some, and want to keep opportunities for themselves. Those people want, really want others to say. Now I have Jesus up there again. Really want people to be anti-corporation.
Yes, I've noticed that.
Put
That's
all
my big...
out, and
right.
They love that ignorance.
Right.
Corporation
is so sad.
It's a beautiful institution that allows people and things to produce vast amounts of wealth, but they're simply hijacked by the few. All right, now if you look at the six-box diagram, now this would allow a broadening of ownership. I just want to shift now to what's below that diagram.
Okay, for those 3% slaving away?
Yes.
Okay, this one here?
It's right below it.
Oh, the chart below.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
A little higher. There we go. Now, what this is a simple chart, and it shows the bottom line shows time. The bottom line, there you go. Shows time, period of years. So it shows 7 years, 14 years, 28 years, 35. Goes on from there, up close to 70 years. And what this chart is doing, it's simply an assumption. It assumes that some percentage of America's 3,000 largest companies, some percentage, we can say X percent because we don't know what percent, will finance Y percent, some other percent, Y percent of their new capital acquisition. Because they're always buying new things all the time, new tools, in a binary way so that ownership is broadened. Or you could say, let's assume that the world's 8,000 largest corporations, that's about how many there are of the same size as our 3,000, will X percent of them will finance Y percent of the capital acquisition in this way. Now, capital acquisition has a payback period. It has a time it takes for the capital to be employed and to then earn the money to pay back the money that was borrowed to buy it. Poor people don't start out with money and don't start out with assets. They have to buy capital with the earnings of capital.
Right.
So there's a payback period. And after it's paid for itself, then the capital is fully paid for. It's like the mortgage. It's like the apartment building. It's no longer in hock to the lender. Now the rents from the apartment building now begin going straight to the owner.
So they go merrily along, and now they own it. Now they're owners.
So this one assumes that a 7-year payback period. So that means in year 8, you see we got the little glove there?
Yeah.
Year 8 is one more year. Imagine a little box right there in year 8, because it's now one little piece of capital is paid for itself. And that capital now has a rate of return, a rate of its earnings. And those dividends now go to employees, neighbors that live around the companies that have installed them, consumers of the company's products, even welfare recipients. In year 9, that's the second year. So the capital that was financed in year 2 is paid for in year 9. The capital that was paid for in year 3 is paid for in year 10. We're adding each year the number of capital acquisitions that are fully paid and are beginning to distribute a capital income to poor and working people. So they're not now just only dependent on wages and welfare. They're now increasingly earning from capital.
Wow.
This shows that if every year you did a certain amount, it shows eventually, you get 30, 40 years down the road, most of the annual acquisitions are fully paid for. By in a couple of generations, it's maybe not in time for you, but maybe for your children, your grandchildren, 80 or 90% of the capital acquisitions are now earning. So this is a way, if you look at it from the point of view of the person in the sweatshop, it may be that in years 8, if the person in the sweatshop was included in capital acquisition, that person will earn maybe 2% of his or her income from capital. 98% still has to come either from their sweatshop wages or from, and I'm not advocating continuing that, I'm just saying assuming everything is the same, or it may have to come from welfare distributions or charity from family. But in year 2, year 10, year 11, year 12, capital income will slowly increase. So it might be 15 or 20 years down the road, that person is earning 20 or 30% of his or her income from capital.
You know, it's
know the amounts. We don't because it's never been tried. But the point is, it's a growing in the same sense that when you put an apple seed in the ground, it may take 5 or 6 years for the apple to begin bringing fruit. But every year after that, the apple is going to come forth with more fruit.
right.
So it's an encapitalization process, we call it, and it simply says that whatever people are doing now, even in terms of these disagreeable jobs that maybe for humane purposes we should stop even before. Nevertheless, whatever they're doing now, the situation will get better. And by the way, we could also ask, why is it that we buy goods made in China in the sweatshops rather than goods made in New Hampshire, the way we used to, with people living a decent living? And the answer may be because we can't afford the ones in New Hampshire anymore, and we can't afford the ones in New Hampshire anymore because people haven't been able to acquire capital with the earnings of capital. If we had encapitalized people starting in 1958, when Louis Kelso first proposed this, maybe the plants in Flint, Michigan wouldn't have had to close.
Right.
Because people could afford those prices.
Right.
We're only going outside and employing people at slave wages because we can't afford the higher prices made by people with decent wages.
Robert, it is so wonderful to have answers to these things, these thorny questions that usually stump people so much that they wind up, taking Prozac,
This has a whole set of answers. Every important question that is debated in economics and economic policy and on television and by the policy wonks, by the Democrats, every important question right now that is discussed, there's a new and refreshing and I think better answer to be found in binary economics.
Wow.
Not a single important question that confronts our society that doesn't have a new, fresh, and important answer in binary economics.
Wow.
So what else can I say? I'm so grateful for what you've done.
Oh, I mean, I'm just so. It's almost like a holy experience, having these encounters. To have bright models, and like I say, the nature of my work, I call to people's attention a lot of gloomy things, but I do it because I'm so confident that once it's pointed out, it can be addressed, dealt with, and we can move on. And you really help me with those moving on tools. So thank you, Robert.
Well, it's my pleasure. You have undergone a transformation. You are an example of what I mean when I say when you always know when somebody sees the vase between the faces, sees the binary alternative, because when one does, and you have, your behavior changes. You are actually, not that you haven't been doing wonderful things even before this.
No, I know what you mean, but I think we have to be careful not to be too much like Jesus freaks. I'll tell you why, because if the penny hasn't quite dropped for someone, you want to make sure that they don't feel that they're excluded because they're not seeing it yet.
Right.
I think to me, I lived through the example of the power of capital ownership, but I didn't understand how it could be widened out for everyone. It seemed as though it was a lottery of some scarce resource. and I didn't comprehend how it, you know, it could have been a seed. It was enough just that it demonstrated to me what it was like to go from, you know, not having much to having, you know, at least 5 million was a lot for me. And now with your knowledge, it completes all these years so that I have the tools that makes my past experience make more sense, and that it can be something valuable for the future for other people.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Well, you're performing a wonderful service.
Thank you. You too, Robert.
Falls on fertile ears. That's the most important thing.
Yeah. So anyway, anytime you talk to anyone, whether it's those 8 students up there, any ideas that you might have for guests, they can talk about how you introduce them, because I do think it's a type of initiation. You know, you do need somebody to walk you through it, and then you see it, and then you run with it.
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure it can be understood by reading. I'm not really sure.
Yeah.
People have, but it doesn't generally work just with reading.
I see. But it's good preparation. Okay, well, thank you so much.
Okay, we'll be in touch.
Definitely. Thanks, Robert.
Take care. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
So there we are, and that was the stream with Robert Ashford from Syracuse, and I may not be able to post that for a few days because I'm going to Dayton, Ohio, but I'll start on it.